The deal is not merely stalled, it is not delayed, it is dead. The Strait of Hormuz, carrying 20% of the world's oil, is not temporarily closed. It is being rebuilt entirely under Iran's control, one where Iran charges nations for passage, one where the IRGC determines who goes through and who does not. The clearest statement of this was issued not today, but in April by the IRGC Navy. Conditions in the Strait, they said, will never return to their previous state, especially for the United States and Israel. Never. This is not the language of a party negotiating terms. It is not the language of a pressured military seeking a face-saving exit. Never is a declaration of intent while the world watches missiles and calls it a war. It is June 3rd, 2026, day 95 of the conflict. On June 1st, Iran suspended all communication with ceasefire mediators. A regional official involved in the mediation told the Associated Press that Iran did not communicate at all on Tuesday, after declaring that a Lebanon ceasefire needed enforcement before negotiations could continue. Semi-official Iranian news agencies, Tasnim and Fars, reported that the resistance front in Iran decided to completely block the Strait of Hormuz and activate other fronts, including the Bab al-Mandeb Strait. Before dawn on June 3rd, Iranian drones struck Kuwait International Airport, killing a person in Terminal 1. The IRGC denied responsibility and blamed a U.S. military system error. The fire has not ceased, the deal was never signed, and the permanent future of the strait was never on the table in the form publicly discussed. The architecture of the deal's failure was present from its first sentence. To understand why it died, one must see what both sides were being asked to accept. The ceasefire brokered by Pakistan's Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif on April 8th came after 40 days of war. The U.S. and Israel had destroyed over 130 Iranian naval vessels, dropped bunker buster bombs on missile sites overlooking Hormuz, and removed or killed multiple senior Iranian officials and scientists. Trump agreed to suspend bombing and attacks if Iran immediately reopened the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi announced 2 weeks of safe passage coordinated with Iran's armed forces. Iran's Supreme National Security Council called this a historic victory and claimed the U.S. accepted Tehran's 10-point plan. Trump later called the plan fraudulent. Pakistan said the ceasefire covered Lebanon. Israel's prime minister said it did not. 4 official parties issued contradictory accounts within 48 hours. This is not how durable diplomatic agreements are made. It is how temporary arrangements are created to stop immediate fighting. The interpretation gap between Washington and Tehran was irreconcilable on the most important issue. Washington demanded a Hormuz free, open, without tolls, and with no Iranian administrative control. Iran demanded international recognition of its sovereignty, giving it the right to administer, restrict, and charge for passage. These positions are not separated by distance that compromise can cover. They are irreconcilable principles. The 60-day framework agreed by late May deferred this difference rather than resolving it. Collapse was inevitable when the moment arrived for suspension, because the Lebanon connection was critical. Iran viewed the April 8th ceasefire as covering Lebanon, linking Hezbollah's situation to Iran's military position. Israel refused, continuing operations in southern Lebanon into June, designating areas as permanent combat zones. For Iran, standing down while Israel destroyed its non-nuclear deterrent would be conceding on 2 fronts. The ceasefires were inseparable. Trump insisted talks continued, claiming a deal to reopen Hormuz was possible within a week. Regional sources said negotiations were back on track, but the IRGC simultaneously threatened permanent closure of Hormuz and activation of Bab al-Mandeb. These signals were not a communications error, but 3 separate institutional tracks. Trump's political track, the regional mediation channel, and the IRGC operational track, each acting independently. The IRGC does not negotiate, it acts. On June 1st, it threatened Hormuz and Bab al-Mandeb. On June 3rd, it struck Kuwait Airport. Statements and actions were consistent with each other, but inconsistent with a deal being near. Financially, the war's impact is clear. On February 28th, Brent crude was $71. The initial shock of Hormuz closure drove it past $100 in days, toward $140 within weeks. The World Bank called it the largest oil market disruption recorded. S&P Global noted tanker transits through Hormuz collapsed by 97%, from 150 vessels a day to 4 or 5. The April 8th ceasefire dropped Brent 16% to approximately $92 per barrel. Through May, as the 60-day framework formed, Brent fell to around $93, a 19% decline from the April peak. On June 1st, when Iran suspended mediator contact and threatened complete Hormuz closure plus Bab al-Mandeb activation, Brent spiked 7% in a session to $95, reflecting market recognition that the deal priced in for 6 weeks was suddenly in doubt, and extreme dual choke point disruption risk was now central. As of June 3rd, Brent sits around $94 to $95, showing the market has given back roughly 2/3 of the peace premium built through May. It is now pricing something between a deal and a collapse. The permanent closure scenario is not fully priced in yet, but the last 72 hours show professional money questioning whether the deal it expected was real. The McCrory Group's $200 per barrel scenario, published in March, assumed Hormuz would remain closed past June. We are 3 weeks from that scenario's horizon. If the dual choke point threat is executed, with Hormuz fully closed and the Houthis in Yemen activating Bab al-Mandeb, the $200 model is no longer extreme. It becomes the base case. The $7 gasoline at the American pump McCrory forecasted represents the outcome of negotiating failure for ordinary people, unaware of the PGSA, the IRGC, Lebanon ceasefire conditions, or secondary sanctions warnings. Anyone who has witnessed the energy shocks of 1973, 1979, 1991, or 2022 knows what happens. In the Gulf reaches their table. The nuclear dimension remains the deepest unresolved issue and central to why the deal is structurally dead, rather than temporarily suspended. Iran's stockpile of uranium enriched to 60%, one short technical sprint from weapons grade, remains the core topic in every conversation between Washington and Tehran. Before the war began on February 28th, Iran held over 400 kilograms of 60% enriched material, verified by the IAEA. The opening strikes of Operation Epic Fury on February 28th hit nuclear sites at Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan. Some material may be buried under rubble. The IAEA cannot fully verify the stockpile because Iran suspended cooperation with UN nuclear inspectors. The U.S. demands any permanent agreement to verifiably dispose of the stockpile. Iran insists the program is non-negotiable, and any agreement must recognize Iran's right to enrich. These positions have remained unchanged through 4 months of war, 6 months of diplomacy, and every round of talks since the JCPOA framework collapsed. The Hormuz sovereignty and nuclear program demands reflect the same Iranian principle, that war and peace must secure international recognition of Iran's rights. Washington consistently states neither is negotiable. Irreconcilable positions become permanent stalemates, resolved only through exhaustion, changes in power balance, or one side accepting what it vowed never to accept. Iran's April statement that conditions will never return to their former status is a policy declaration. Its formal peace terms included a demand for recognition of Iranian sovereignty over Hormuz, buried in the 5-point counterproposal and the framework of the new Persian Gulf Order. This reveals what the IRGC is building. The PGSA, established May 5th, is not a wartime improvisation. It anchors the sovereignty claim, administering the new Persian Gulf Order with a legal basis from Iranian parliament's March 30th and 31st passage of the Strait of Hormuz Management Plan. It has a public presence on X, an email for permit applications, processed over 300 transit requests, bilateral exemptions with Iraq, Pakistan, India, and multiple Asian nations, and charges up to $2 million per vessel in cryptocurrency and Chinese yuan designed to bypass U.S. sanctions. These institutional elements are consistent with surviving a deal and emerging as permanent authority over the world's most important shipping lane. Iran's peace terms ask whether the post-war world accepts it as the permanent sovereign of Hormuz. The United States has yet to answer directly, as doing so would acknowledge the war has not resolved the fundamental question of whether American power can force a no. The human cost of permanent closure is significant. The OECD projects a prolonged disruption into 2027 would slow global economic growth to 2.1% in 2026 and 1.8% in 2027, rates extremely low outside major recessions. Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and sub-Saharan African nations, reliant on imported energy, with governments operating on narrow margins, bear the brunt of extended Hormuz disruption. U.S. households have already paid the inflation premium from 3 months of disruption. Permanent or dual choke point closure translates to McCrory's $200 oil and $7 gasoline at the pump. Food, airline tickets, freight, everything downstream of energy costs is affected. Those debating sovereignty, enrichment percentages, and back channels are not the ones paying. Ordinary people will see the effects in grocery bills and gas stops. Iran killed the deal on June 1st by suspending mediator contact, though it has done so before. The April 8th ceasefire followed apparent collapse in talks. Deals in such conflicts often cycle between collapse and revival until the moment they do not. Trump's claim that talks continued may have been accurate at the time. A regional source reporting negotiations back on track hours later may also have been accurate. The honest account is that the deal has been killed by the structural impossibility that has plagued it since the war began. The gap between free Hormuz and sovereign Hormuz does not move. Every week without a signed agreement strengthens the PGSA's operation, processing requests, and building the institutional precedent for Iranian control. The practical reality drifts further from Washington's legal principle of free transit. Permanent closure framing concerns the trajectory. Hormuz closed or controlled for over 3 months will not return to pre-war operations immediately. Ships rerouted around the Cape of Good Hope, insurance repriced, supply chains adjusted. Even a signed deal does not restore normal operations instantly. Saudi Aramco's CEO said normalization would not arrive before 2027 if closure continues past mid-June. We are 3 weeks from that date. Iran's official and semi-official statements reinforce the permanence. The IRGC's April declaration that conditions will never return, the 5-point counter-proposal demanding recognition of sovereignty, the Strait of Hormuz management plan codified in Parliament, the PGSA as formal administrative authority, the first vice president forbidding enemy military equipment transit, and the IRGC's June 1st threat of complete closure, plus Bab al-Mandeb as permanent measures. Each points in the same direction. Iran is not negotiating temporary reopening. It is negotiating global recognition of its right to permanently administer, restrict, and profit from the world's most important energy corridor. The PGSA embodies that reality, with bilateral exemptions and legal claims anchoring it. The United States retains military power to prevent Iran from physically holding Hormuz closed against all comers. The United States demonstrated capability by destroying 130 Iranian naval vessels in 3 weeks. What remains unproven is the ability to prevent Iran's permanent administrative claim from becoming institutionalized after the war. These are separate challenges requiring distinct tools. OFAC's designation of the PGSA and the Hellfire strikes into tanker engine rooms, while symbolically necessary, are military and financial measures, applied to a fundamentally political and legal problem. The IRGC's corrupt machinery, commanders profiting from PGSA tolls, leadership building a parallel economy through sanctions evasion, generals issuing press releases about Fifth Fleet strikes while drones hit civilian airports and then denying the attacks, all converge in the PGSA. This is not a weapon. It is bureaucracy, a form, an email address at InfoAPGSAIR, a permit, a passcode broadcast over VHF radio, the administrative markers of sovereignty over an international waterway. This is what the deal competes with, not just Iran's nuclear program or ceasefire terms, but the institutional claim that the world's most important energy corridor is Iran's to administer. Even a signed deal will not automatically undo the 3 months of institutional reality the PGSA has established. The central question remains: the gap between Washington's requirement for a free Hormuz, no Iranian authority, no tolls, no bilateral permission, no PGSA, fully open under international maritime law, and Iran's demand for formal sovereign recognition of its administration and profit from transit. This is not a negotiating gap. It is a definitional conflict over who governs the world's key energy choke point. A deal could specify Hormuz is open, toll-free, yet the PGSA-X account remains active. In-free PGSA-IR email continues processing applications. IRGC Navy still hails tankers and VHF to verify permits. And China, India, and Pakistan maintain exclusive bilateral terms. Iranian state television may report diplomatic recognition of the new Persian Gulf order regardless of the agreement text. A deal ends a war, but does not erase the 3 months of institutional architecture built during it. If that structure survives, the deal concludes the shooting and begins a permanent contest over whether the legal principle it supposedly defended is real. If, in practice, Hormuz is administered by the IRGC with its nationals list, bilateral carve-outs, and cryptocurrency toll system, then the question arises: what did the Abraham Lincoln and its air wing achieve when firing Hellfires into tanker engine rooms in international waters? There is no clean answer, yet the question is urgent. The mediation framework maintaining this conflict deserves careful assessment. Pakistan's Prime Minister, Shahbaz Sharif, invested political capital positioning Islamabad as the indispensable intermediary between Washington and Tehran. Pakistan is one of the bilateral exemption countries, so its operators avoid the full $2 million toll. This is part of Iran's diplomatic scaffolding around its Hormuz sovereignty claim. Countries mediating for Tehran gain access. Those mediating for Washington receive secondary sanctions warnings. Pakistan serves as an honest broker while benefiting commercially from the PGSA's bilateral exemptions. China is similarly positioned, holding the most consequential exemption. Chinese-controlled vessels were among the first cleared transits through the Strait under the PGSA. China vetoed a UN Security Council resolution authorizing force to reopen Hormuz and publicly calls for freedom of navigation while benefiting from the PGSA's tiered access system rewarding non-supporters of U.S. enforcement. Claims and accommodations shaped by this system will not reverse on the day a deal is signed. These bilateral arrangements carry real financial value. Pakistan's terms matter to its shipping operators, India's to energy importers. Agreements on the waterway's nominal status do not erase established precedents. Denmark's historic collection of sound dues lasted centuries. The Suez Canal Authority survived wars and nationalizations. Institutional claims over strategic waterways are resilient, even against clear legal principles. In 95 Days of War, the PGSA, exemptions and cryptocurrency payment system, created a post-war governance claim over a key energy corridor in administrative maritime language. The mostly agreed, unsigned deal did not address whether that claim survives the ceasefire, because resolving it would require one side to concede what it vowed never to. From June 1st to June 3rd, a revealing development emerged. After the IRGC denied responsibility for the Kuwait airport attack, blaming a U.S. military systems error, it demonstrated the conflict's communication architecture. The denial came hours after an attack captured on video, showing debris, fires, Patriot battery footage, and confirmation from Kuwait's defense ministry. The IRGC statement was not intended for external belief. It provided political cover within Iran for leaders managing a ceasefire and allied governments needing a formulation to continue bilateral engagement without acknowledging a PGSA exemption partner's lethal action. The denial is a bureaucratic service like PGSA permit forms and VHF passcodes, administrative language dressing every act in the guise of legitimate governance. Over 95 days, the IRGC has become more administrative, not just aggressive. Administrative claims resist military strikes more than drones. Brent crude at $94 to $95 reflects what military statistics cannot. It signals professional money's assessment of outcome probabilities. When traders price oil at 95, they indicate that normalization probability, previously priced at 92, has fallen, while extended disruption probability has risen. The 7% spike on June 1st after Iran suspended talks shows the market believed the deal was lost. The fact it has not rebounded to 98 shows the market is unconvinced the deal will return. The gap between $92 and $140, Brent represents a world where Hormuz normalizes versus one where it does not. The current $94 to $95 is the market's estimate along that spectrum, carrying 95 days of war, ceasefire violations, PGSA transit requests, Hellfire strikes into engines, IRGC press releases on Fifth Fleet strikes, and denials of the Kuwait airport attack contradicted by footage. That number records the conflict's cost and professional judgment on its trajectory. Whether it trends toward $92, $140, or $200 depends on a question unresolved since February 28th. Is the Strait of Hormuz a free international waterway under legal principles ratified by 168 nations, or the Persian Gulf Strait Authority's domain administered by an IRGC-linked institution under bilateral exemptions and cryptocurrency payments? These are not the same Hormuz, and the world has yet to choose which to live with. Please leave your thoughts about this content in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.